Dzień dobry. O matko, ale słyszę się mocno. Dzień dobry.
Hello, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. Welcome to the third panel discussion at our Playstorming conference at the Goethe-Institut in Krakau. I am Rafał Stanowski. I am delighted to run our discussion here during this panel. Let me introduce our guests to everyone. We've got a number of guests from different countries present here. We will be talking whether games can be considered art or perhaps just fun. Eurídice Cabañes.
Przedstawicielka Audio Games.
From Audio Games. Andreas Lange, Computerspielemuseum in Berlin.
I Erik Zimmerman.
And Eric Zimmerman, New York University.
Zaczniemy od krótkich prezentacji każdego.
To start with brief presentations made by the panelists and then time for discussion.
Hello. Okay, I'm Eurídice, but I don't want to talk about me because here today, oh, there's no.
It's moving.
Moving.
Slowly.
Hello. Here today, I'm not Eurídice. I mean, I'm still being Eurídice, but I'm Audio Games. That now.
Yeah, as we see.
That is more. Oh, it's disconnected. Okay.
It's only a game.
Yeah. So I am Audio Games here. That is also Carlos Padial and Luca Carruba. That they are not here today, but I'm like kind of representing them. But also Audio Games is part of a huge project that is called Arsgames that have more people there. So today I'm all of them. And Arsgames is a cultural association that works about the video game as a cultural project, especially from art way. I think for this I get invited here. Since 2006. It's a totally open organization. Everyone can join it. So we have a lot of really crazy projects because in Arsgames you can find a philosopher and a hacker working together. That is the case in Audio Games, for example. So much people from much disciplines, you get more crazy and crazy projects. Today I will make a short review of the most important projects that we have actually. And one is Game Start, that is an educative project that we can describe like as a ludic, horizontal and free learning environment where the kids from 8 to 18 years old go and develop his own project. So they do video games, they do robotics, they do machinimas. Now they have a project of mounting a 3D printer. But they do whatever they want. We don't teach them. We just join them in his learning process. And we learn also. For example, a kid teach a workshop of Construct 2, and I learn a lot. This project have been taken as a study case in the university, in some universities in Spain, and there is a lot of publication about the project. I think not a lot in English, and a book, but it's just in Spanish for the moment. This is Play Lab. That is a lab for making experimental video games. Have 3 editions ready, and it's like 2 weeks. The people develop video games with different subjects. The first one was about innovating with the interface. So you can see this one was a game that was playing with plasticine, but there are others like board games with augmented reality, or a duel that you play with against another player and who shoot first win. But for shooting, you need to get relaxed because you wear a helmet that is measuring your brain waves. There are like 8 projects we developed in the first one. The second one was about the global crisis. So in this one, all the people decide to work together in a huge project, not divided by different projects. And the last one was really cool about narratives. And the coolest part was that we introduced kids also. It was from 7 to 35 years old, and they work collaboratively, horizontally, breaking all the age hierarchies. And also we have a platform, an editorial platform that is hybrid. We publish books about games. We have a semestral game studies magazine, journal, sorry. And we publish video games, board and role games, and digital interactive books. The most important about this part is that every content is published by free license, open source, Creative Commons, GPL, and we give a lot of importance to the process. That means that the people cannot come to us and say, I have a book, publish it. They can do it, but they can also say, I have a great idea about do something, a crazy video game, or a transmedia study about gender that includes a video game and digital interactive book and blah, blah, blah. And they can put it there, people can join them, and they can start to work together and documenting all the process. What means when someone wants to see about the project, even if it wasn't finished or even if no one finished and get totally abandoned, they can see all the processes, all the steps, all the mistakes that they commit, so they can learn from this, and everyone can learn from this. And the last one, that is the one that I was invited to present. The other was cheating. Is audio games. Audio games is a mixture between a audio game and interactive sound installation. The game consists in an empty space, 6 square meters, where you move around, and you are wearing the headphones, so you can see objects. You cannot see it, you cannot touch it, but you can hear it. And it's a binaural sound, so you can detect perfectly the position of the object that is making a tone. And you can interact with it. You can go where the sound is and push it, and we interact with the other sounds, colliding, and we'll make a real-time sound composition. But also it's a game, because it has mechanics. And the mechanics is based in a really simple game, like Pac-Man. So you have like a bad enemy sound that is like, doo. And this one you have to avoid it, because it's touched, you lost the game. You have the neutral sounds that are like tones, and you have the bonus that is like ding, 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 ding. Try to be really intuitive to don't have tutorials or that. And if you pick the bonus one, the neutral objects will disappear, so you have to clean the scene and go to the next level. It is, for example, really funny, the borders are marked with the line, but you are with closed eyes, so you said, how I abandoned the scenery. Okay, sounds like that you are getting shocked, so everyone do like instinctively. The most important part of this project, I think, is a mixed project, because it's a research project that starts like with a research about synesthesia, but after become also a research about video games and space and technology and how we perceive the space in video games. And it's also a product. So we can say that is the result of the research, the method of research, and even the research tool in different moments, and it's a complete circuit. We are constantly prototyping, so every time we research more, we improve the platform game, and we research more, taking the results of the people playing it, so all the time. We were from 2010, and this is the last version. And it's really funny also, because you think in video games and you think in industry. And this game was totally developed in the artistic institutions. Was developing artistic residence, and it was exhibited in festivals or in museums. So getting into the discussion subject that is like art or entertainment, or if it can be together, I think there's two different things that one's do and another not. I mean, the entertainment as a commercial product have to be a product. The important is the result. But in art, you can experiment, so the important is also the process. Of course, you can have art that is industrial produced, like Hollywood productions. I think it's more difficult to get industrial that is artistic way produced, because you can lose a lot of money. I'm ready.
It's all, yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Teraz Andreas Lange, czyli
Lange and Games Museum in Berlin.
Where is it? It's on the left. On the left. That's a good hint. And top.
Yeah, it's a game.
Up, Lange. But even I have my glasses on, I can't find it. So. Go up. Oh, all right. Because it was black, so that's not okay, so I'm speaking English, not perfect in it, please excuse, but I think it's the best thing to get a good discussion here. I want to highlight some historical, two or three, very briefly, historical incidents, milestones, which I find relevant for the topic today. And I also want to show you an example, an experience which we had in 2008 with a game art piece, exhibiting it at a commercial fair as an impulse for the discussion. So somehow that's quite an easy thing. Of course, games are picked up by artists as part of our culture. This is graffiti or sculpture or painting. It's not a painting, it's more a sculpture done by the famous French artist Invader. It's a street game artist. And of course, somehow that's very traditional kind of art, that you take something which is part of a culture and make an art piece out of it. But I want to focus on, in my opinion, the most interesting aspect of computer games, especially if you consider them as art. It's their nature as interactive medium. I think that's a critical thing, that they put the spectator or the reader or the visitor into an active role. And that's what I want to highlight. And I want to start with a quote of Marcel Duchamp, who was one of the first who pointed at the fact that an art piece is only complete if you have a spectator or a recipient, because only in his or her head the art piece became get a meaning. But that's very much related to every piece of art, a painting, a sculpture. So that's true for every art. But it's of course an important thought, which meanwhile, at least to my opinion, is underlaying every recent art theory. But it's not the main point. So the main point is, and that's the next historical thing that happened in the early 60s, and Namjoon Paik is one of the protagonists of this idea, not only considering that as a theoretic concept, but then, of course, if it's so, then let the spectator participate, not only by giving meaning to the art object, but also to interact with it. And as you can see, this is very much foreseeing video game as a medium, and that happened a few years later. Here in this example, I show you the invention of home video games, which is very much the concept of Namjoon Paik, but now it became a commercial product. But it's the same thing. You let the spectator interact with a medium, something which you can see on a screen. But now it became a game, but it's pretty much the same. And now I want to show you an example what we experienced in 2008 when we exhibited an art piece, a game art piece by Douglas Edric Stanley. It's an American who's living in France, and he's done a piece related to the 9/11 incident, and he used Space Invaders, which is a game you surely know as a game classic. And just to explain you how it is played, the player has to move. It's motion tracking. Basically, the player has to move on the line, and then he's controlling the gun. And every time he's doing something like that, the gun is shooting. So it's pretty much Space Invaders, but with motion control. You are not putting a joystick to the left, but you have to move on the left. You're not pressing the button to fire, but you really have to fire. And then he's merging it with the 9/11 thing. Like in the original Space Invader game, you can't win it. So there will be the situation that so many aliens are coming down and has destroyed the houses that you lost. And because it's an arcade game, there's no arcade game you can win. And so his idea was to use that classic game, merge it with the historic incidents of 9/11, let the players, the spectators play, and making them think about the Vergeblichkeit. Was heißt Vergeblichkeit auf Englisch? Okay, was heißt Vergeblichkeit? Na, das ist ja auch blöd. Na, Vergeblichkeit, Leute. Matthias. Futility. Thanks very much. So, thanks to Google Translator. So he wants to make the spectators aware about the futility of acting against such a threat by aggression, by shooting to them. That was his idea. And what happened is this artwork, which we showed on a commercial game fair in Germany in 2008, caused an uproar. It really caused an uproar. It was debated on Fox News, on Daily Telegraph. The people from Taito were contacted, who are the IP holders of Space Invaders, and were asked by journalists how they liked the idea that their game is used in such an artwork. And of course they sent us a letter and said, please stop it immediately. You are not allowed to use our game in such a context. And so this is only one comment of very many comments which were sent to us, to Douglas Stanley, and as you can see, there are a lot of complaints about that work. And then this is the main reply of Stanley, and so basically he says, of course he's feeling sorry if somebody felt insulted by his work, but that was not his intention. And he also feels that he has not violated the original Space Invaders game. And as you can see, that's how he reacted. And my point is, and then I'm stop for now, is that if we are talking about games and art, we also have to talk about context. Context, and this is, brings us back to the thoughts of Marcel Duchamp, is very important, at least in our times, to define what is art and what is not art. And our problem in this example was one on the first layer, on the first level, that the artist merged an entertainment product with a historic incident, which of course has a big impact, especially to American people. And our second problem was that we showed that artwork not in a museum or in a gallery, but we showed it at a commercial fair for computer games and video games. And this combination, that somehow caused the problems. And so that's something I wanted to show you at the start of our exhibition discussion, and maybe we use that example in the further process of discussion. Thank you.
Hi, so my comments are fairly brief too, so we can get right to the good part, the discussion and debating. When I was asked to participate on this panel, what I wanted to do a little bit was just think about this question, art or entertainment in the context of games. And it's not at all, it's an important and interesting question. So, but it's a question that comes up a lot if you're someone that's in games. Can games be art? Are they art or not? What makes something art? And so I wanted to, instead of answering the question the question a little bit as a way of sort of raising issues that we can discuss on the panel. So what I wanted to go over quickly are 5 reasons why art or entertainment might be the wrong question to ask. Okay, so number 1, art can be anything. In the 20th century, I think we found that art can really be just about anything. From Duchamp's ready-mades, so thank you, Andreas, for setting me up for that, to surrealist parlor games, to performances by Daniel Buren where he shoots himself with a gun. So there's a sense for me in which asking why can't games be art, it's sort of like your grandparents saying, that rock and roll noise isn't music, right? It's old-fashioned. I mean, I feel like anything can be art, and certainly games could be considered art as well. Another way we might question the question is that asking if games can be art implies that it can be answered by looking at the games themselves, right? As if it's some intrinsic quality of an object, which I think Andreas also brought up. So what makes something art is not the object itself, but in many, often cases, the professional practices around it. Much contemporary art is about recontextualization, putting advertising on a canvas or a commodity in a gallery. What makes something art? For me, it's really when it participates in the professional practices of art. Who made it and why? What kind of organization is funding it or exhibiting it? Who's studying it or commenting on it? And what reason do they have for considering something art? So I think the example of the Invaders artwork is really perfect in that sense. Number 3, art should not be an aspirational category. So the question, art or entertainment, are games art, implies that art is some kind of high category. And games are like the nerdy kids at the entrance to the club. We're held back by the velvet rope from getting inside, while all of the beautiful art people are sort of in there hobnobbing and having a much better time inside that club. But I want to say that what's going on inside that club, maybe inside the art world, is sort of like a bunch of old farts hanging on to the past, right? What's happening on the street outside the club is maybe much more interesting. So So perhaps art is no longer this sort of the high category in, in which culture should be valued. You could argue that we're living in an era in which design as a paradigm has more cultural juice than art as a cultural category. So one way of questioning the question is to say that games should not aspire to be art. Art should aspire to have the cultural relevance of games, and that we shouldn't be looking backwards and envious of art as game people. Number 4, let's not look for art in the wrong places. This one needs to be explained. So the question, art or entertainment, implies that we're waiting for that brilliant masterpiece that's going to convince everyone that, oh, of course games are art. Now I see it. Here's this brilliant game that has convinced me. But it's a little bit, that idea is premised on the notion that art is about a genius artist who has an important message or idea or interpretation of culture, and that they communicate that message using the art as a medium, as a transmission device to transmit the meaning. So it's possible that games are something different than that games are not about a medium for transmitting a message. Instead, games are perhaps less of something created than something that's used. They're less a musical composition and more of a musical instrument. Again, that was Nam June Paik's metaphor, I think. So to be played by players. They're less a work of literature and more a kind of grammar, a set of possibilities that create meaning as they're used and explored and inhabited by players. And that sound piece comes to mind. Games as art may never look like art as we know it, because games perhaps are different than a classical notion of what art is. Okay, finally, maybe we don't want to call something art, because what does it mean to aspire to this category? Perhaps we should only look forward to games becoming art when we're really sick of them. And culture has already moved on to more interesting things. Once games are just another discipline in the academy, just another section in the newspaper, just another department in the store, then they no longer have the disruptive power that makes them so special. So rather than trying to figure out how games can become more like art, perhaps we should be rescuing games from becoming art, delaying their enshrinement into the halls, the morgue, the cemetery that is art. Okay, so that's it. Those are my five ways in which we might question the question. Thank you.
Thank you.
I should say also that I was trained as an artist, so I very much am the loyal opposition to art. So I'm not gratuitously bashing art. It's something I have a deep love-hate relationship with, I think.
Okay, I think you finished a bit our discussion, Eric, with all those 5 points. Yeah, we can say thank you very much. It was pretty all. Okay, so now I'm thinking Polish. Myślę, że możemy zacząć od takiej małej zabawy.
Maybe we can start with a little game. Let us start with a little game. Maybe first a game for the audience, and then the panelists will be able to take over. It's very easy. There is a question, games, arts or entertainment, and now, please, we'll be raising hands in a moment. Those who believe that it's entertainment, hands up.
Dobrze. Okay. So,
all right.
Yeah. I thought you will
do this at the end, but you know, okay. No to teraz gry jako sztuka.
Right, so now games as art.
Okay.
No to już mniej więcej wiemy.
Right, so we know roughly where we are, what our point of departure is. So again, the question, arts or entertainment. Well, I myself, of course, considered the issue. I've been thinking about it for quite some time now. I think that we are now in quite an important moment. Important changes are occurring now, because I've been watching video games and playing, of course, video games for years. I was starting with Atari computer. Perhaps you still remember this old equipment, Atari 65, ZX Spectrum. The games, well, have become an ideal product now for entertainment in general, product, entertainment product, stressing the word product, but I'm under the impression that if you take a look at film as well, because I deal with film as well, I think games can be compared to the films, to the cinema. The cinema started as mass entertainment, shown to people something at the cinema. They saw the train coming, they all got so much scared, but later the cinema started developing and the film developed thanks to those artists who started making films and simply pushed film in general, pushed it forward, making it focus more on arts, perhaps artistic cinema. Therefore it developed what we can call the language of the cinema, the language of art. So now a question to the panelists. What is your view? When artists enter the discipline, when artists create perhaps what might be considered artistic games prepared by artists, do you think that this can change the whole reality where we are at the moment? Thanks.
So maybe I start with a historical answer, I'm focusing on a historical aspect. So computer games has not only started as pure entertainment. So even in very early times, there were developers creating games, for example, text adventures, which were perceived as art by the developers. Interactive fiction, for example, is a label of a very famous company back then, Infocom, in the early 80s. We had artists, authors, famous art authors who worked for Infocom, and like Douglas Adams, for example, who of course is an artist. I think that's not disputable. And so the development you just draw from the movie development to game development, that's somehow not true. It's not working. That's maybe my answer, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to look at the history of cinema as a parallel. I'm not a film scholar. My understanding is that it took a very long time for cinema to be considered art by both the audience and the practitioners. I believe that moving pictures were sort of like a technical novelty. They were like shown at carnival sideshows, cinemascopes, and was a lot of recorded theater. People would sort of record theater scenes, and it was a lot about, it was more like an almost vaudeville kind of form of entertainment. Then it became very commercial, right, in the mid-20th century by these large studios. I guess it depends in what sense we mean art, but I think it's only in the, like, maybe starting in the, 1960s, 1970s, when there were more kind of individual, independent filmmakers that started thinking themselves in a more traditional artistic sense. I think what we've seen in games is that, as opposed to cinema, which did have a long kind of experimental, I think it was a lot of technical experimentation, games became commercialized video games became commercialized very, very quickly. Yeah. So I think that what we've seen is that beyond the very first earliest video games, within a decade or so, we had a big and growing video game industry. I actually think the thing that maybe is interesting in this question of entertainment or art for games is that the biggest shift, I think, in the 20th century for games, maybe just as important as the rise of computers, is the rise of authored games. Mm-hmm. So that games for centuries and millennia generally did not have authors. There are exceptions. I mean, basketball in the late 19th century was an authored game created by one person. But in general, sports and parlor games, chess, Go, Mancala, Parcheesi, they evolved as folk culture. But But what we've seen in the 20th century is more and more there's an individual author thinking of games as a authored work, which I think is maybe the single biggest shift in them that starts to bring them into the realm of art, entertainment, and media in a contemporary sense, where there's a sort of a person or a team creating often with an intention, a political or aesthetic intention. So I don't know if that answers the question about art or entertainment, but I think that for me, that shift to authored culture is really important to consider.
Yeah, I think there's a question over there. I don't know if I replied before or it should.
Yeah, as you want. You want to answer? No?
Let him talk. No, but I guess it's about what he said.
Okay. Yeah.
We have a film historian in the audience, I think.
To znaczy, może teraz po polsku jednak powiem. To znaczy, to nie jest pytanie.
Well, this is not really a question, just a comment. I would like to participate in the discussion. I'd like to draw attention to a number of issues. I like this comparison to the film, to the cinema. Perhaps comic strips also could be an interesting comparison here. To call video games art, because I understand we speak about video games mainly. In order to call them art, I think you have to think about the roots. Mass culture is where the games are rooted. Very often mass culture was considered anti-art. So there is a certain psychological barrier, perhaps, that makes it difficult or impossible to consider games art. Another point, from what I have noticed, especially considering, for instance, film, comic strips, games, what is important is that we need some time. Some time has to pass before you consider something new art. This is what happens to film, as you've discussed it. The same goes for comic strips. Even today, some have doubts whether comic strips can be considered art. But most people would agree anyway that yes, it is possible to consider it art. And in such situations, what usually happens is that certain artists rise in a given discipline. They make it well-known, famous, and I think they contribute to making something art. And then whatever was done before is also considered art. So I think the same is going to happen to games. Thank you.
I think before we get lost in this discussion about art, entertainment, art, video games, I would like to give an answer to the specific question that he made about what we think about the artists that are making games or artistic games. And I think his work is really important because even when you say the video games are not made for transmit a message, they do. I mean, they are always transmitting some values, some message. And normally, in a conscious way, I mean, the video games represent the symbolic universe of our culture. And we can see in the video games a lot of stuff that is an image about what's happening. For example, in a gender cases, like the video games, a lot of males are strong and the girls, you know, the obvious. But it's not the game's issue, it's the society issue. And the artistic people or people from art or the people that just is trying to make some art games, I think they are taking into account that, seeing what is the message that the video games used to transmit and trying to reappropriate this kind of power to transmitting through the game to rebel this same stuff. I mean, we have the best example here with the products of Mulindustria. I mean, they take the symbolic universe that is normally represented in culture and it subvert in a video game. Organ Simulator is really cool. I don't know if any of you play it. It's really cool. You have to simulate an organ because you're a woman and you will have to learn how to do this stuff to succeed. I mean, take some stuff that is in the cultural universe, symbolic universe, and make it into the stream, into the comically, so it's like a kind of political demand. And that's really amazing, and just the people that is analyzing what is the video games language and our cultural language and how we express that stuff can really make a favor to the games, saying to the video games, hey, look at yourself, look at your language. Even there are a lot of meta games that subvert the own language of the game, and it's saying, hey, look, the video games create, what is the space bar for? Someone? Jumping. just take a lot of stuff that we think is, we just take it. We didn't think that we are taking it. We didn't think that, oh, okay, this Spanish bar is always perfect for jump, or, oh, the spikes are always bad, or, oh, if there is someone saying something in the screen, is someone that I have to do, because the game is about that. There are games that you have someone saying you what to do, and is lying, or just lying sometimes, or is just narrating what you already done, like in the Stanley Parable. That's amazing, because if the video game is conscious about his own language, can grow. I think the artists that are making games are making a favor to the industry of games.
So you're saying that something which challenges conventions is art. Conventions of representation or of input, those are two of your examples, right? Of gender representation. So I think the challenge of talking about this art question is that art is like a blank canvas, pardon the metaphor, that we can project anything on, right? So there's a million valid ways to define something as art. So there's plenty of examples of highly commercial games that do all of those things too, right? Try and reinvent interaction, try and question gender stereotypes within the mainstream game industry. I'm not sure that we would want to say that any challenging of conventions automatically makes something art, right? I'm not sure. No. Can I add something?
Yeah, of course. But...
Może ja powiem to po polsku. Wydaje mi się, że troszeczkę
I think that where we are, we're moving in areas that have to be defined close. So we have to define, narrow down some of the issues we are discussing. What art is. I don't want to bore you down, but I am an art historian, and we're groping around, but we're not being very concrete. The cinema can be divided into artistic and commercial comic strips. There is also so-called storyboard, the utilitarian form, painting also. There are different types, illustrations, book illustrations, for instance, something different from other forms. We don't have to, I think, get... it should be quite easy to divide also games between artistic games and more commercial games. I think there are many of those, and more of the artistic type. But what is interesting, I think, is the division between artists who use some elements, aesthetic, mechanic, whether they use those elements, and the way in which different games, as Eric said at the beginning, whether they make reference to the world of art. This is what I think the main division should be created, and I would now consider why and what kind of diffusion can be found between those areas. I think that's the area where more can be said.
And I see there's a lady who's been waiting for quite a long time. She's raised her hand, and it's quite a dangerous sign for the moderator. Let me say the following. First, let me defend mass culture. Ever since pop art, we have had this mass culture which was used by art. We had Warhol, who became an icon, and he introduced this pop mass culture to white keyboard, introduced it into the galleries, and now it's academic culture, and we can see this culture in national museums. And the comic strips, Warhol introduced it to mass culture as well. So when you say that there are no museums for comic arts, well, it's untrue. Comic strip is a form of art. Yes, I understand, but I see what you mean. But it is not the same kind of piece of art that you're going to see at Fine Arts Academy, right? Professor Vasina, he has workshops. Yes, but let's not go too deep into that. Comic strip is one of the few. It's exceptional. Yes, says the lady, but I meant something else. A game can touch upon an important subject. Also, you can modify an existing game to change it. You can add content to a ready-made game. Just like Space Invaders was a very good example. And then it'll become a piece of art. So also you can analyze it at the level of the skills, and then you will say that, you know, that it's well made. But in Poland, you won't find it in museums, even though in New York it is one of the key media. So we should think for a moment why we do that and what for we do and why we're using it. I should have made an assumption at the very start. This is an international meeting. So yes, in Poland the situation is different than in New York. I'm sorry to say that. And this is the reality. So here in Poland, some role models need to decide and make up their minds about the role of video games. They still haven't, and it may take years before they do so, before they decide that games can be considered art. Yes, this kind of thinking is a utopian one. Let's assume that you go to the Ministry of Economy or Ministry of Art. They are responsible for many sectors, and when you tell something about video games, when you mention video games, they will think you're an alien. And mind you, I'm not siding with them, but this is the way those people at the ministries see video games. Now, let me add one more thing here. And it can be a basic tool of perception of symbolic volatility or rather aggression. And games are used as a tool to subdue other classes. This is how you might see them, how you might look at them.
I just want to kind of connect to a couple of things that were said before. And I get into this debate a lot because I'm an artist and I work with games, or I'm a game designer and I work with art. I don't really care. And to me, always, like, when you get into these big debates, it helps to kind of try and use other terms or to go into a little bit more of a common sense language. And one thing I think people can easily agree on is that there are art institutions and there are artists, and and there's also people that make games, and there's some of them call themselves game designers. And I think the more interesting question is, what can these people learn from each other? And I experience a lot of interest from the art world, the official art world that calls itself art world. They have a lot of hope that games can help them. They can help them, create things like participation, or community, or interaction, or all these words. Like, this is something very real that the art world, is interested in. More engagement, all these things. The art world is interested to learn from people that know about games, that make games, On the other hand, I think game designers can really learn from art people to ask questions or to address problems, like the stuff that Paolo's doing, for example. I mean, is really good examples of how games can, I think, take upon strategies that have been developed in the art world, and especially avant-garde art. Art changes also. This is also very important. Same as the games world is, in constant transformation, art also. So I think it's much more easy to look at examples of how these people interact, how they talk to each other, what they can learn to each other. Not to say I don't enjoy this vicious fight over definitions, but maybe the other strategy is a little bit more, helpful and get some results.
Yeah, sure. Hopefully we can move from the definitional question, because I think that it's not necessarily saying that it has to be resolved. Except, I guess, by this cultural ministry.
Bardzo dziękuję. Ale właśnie...
Wojtek? The whole point is, it's not only about the ministry or Minister of Culture. We're forgetting about one thing, art of entertainment. This question is never an innocent one. In our civilization, art follows different rules when it comes to freedom of expression. In Poland, it doesn't always work, does it? However, an artist may hide behind this artistic privilege. Not in Poland necessarily, but throughout the world or Europe, yes. And yes, there is this German stamp saying that games can be art. Doom and Doom 2 were forbidden from being sold in Germany. And there was this special ministry or whatever that this body, this authority, banned Doom and Doom 2 from sales in Germany. And that ban was lifted 17 years ago because it was considered that those games are a part of art. But, well, the ban was a silly thing to start with, but at least the result was good because they lifted the ban ultimately.
You can.
The idea that the cultural status of different forms of culture change over time, I think, is really important. I remember seeing a talk by, well, I guess I won't name names. He was a very famous computer scientist who helped develop parallel processing. Really smart guy. He was talking at a games conference, and he said, you know, he ended his talk by talking about Guitar Hero. This was a few years ago when it was very, very popular. And he said, you know, those Guitar Hero is so popular, and I see so many kids playing Guitar Hero. He said, at least some of them end up wanting to take rock and roll guitar lessons. Right? For him, that was, okay, there's the saving grace. In other words, the one good thing about Guitar Hero is that it encouraged some kids to take rock and roll guitar lessons. Now, when you first hear that, it seems like it's hard to disagree with, right? But if you think about the historical context, it wasn't that long ago when rock and roll guitar was seen as not just sort of sexual perversion and noise and not music, but by some people like the sign of the decline of Western civilization, right? That rock and roll music was bringing down society and culture as we knew it. So I guess what I want to say is that at some point in the future, after games sort of have been part of the establishment and the debate is over, there's going to be some other newer cultural form that the kids are doing, and that none of us in this room will understand. We'll all be grumpy old people at that point, and we'll say, you know, and we'll say like, I don't know why they're doing this or what use it has, but at least some of them are ending up playing video games, right? Because the thing about music is that none of us question the idea that playing music is important and good. Studying music, composing music, learning an instrument. None of us question that. None of us question that, yeah, of course you can do it in a popular way. It can become part of an art practice. It can be sort of the whole range, right? But that playing and studying and understanding and listening to music is somehow intrinsically good. So games are coming out of a time when they really were debased and, you know, video games were being banned, but they still haven't reached a level of that sort of general public acceptance where we just say, well, play is part of being human. Playing games is just intrinsically good. We don't have to justify why people play. We don't have to say there's a special function, just like music. I mean, you could do a cognitive study of how music helps you, but that won't convince anyone that playing music is important or good. So I guess that I would say that that's kind of a little bit where we are in games, that eventually, you know, I think games are also probably going to become part of that pantheon of human activities that are generally thought of as potentially artistic and intrinsically good.
I think it's almost the opposite of the question. I mean, the video games are not becoming art. I think the art is becoming video game. I mean, the art some years ago was an object, you know, a paint, something that you can put in some place and the people can see it and say, oh, you are cool, you have art. After it became more objectual, now it's interactive. I mean, the spectator is not anymore a spectator. You have a really amazing piece of art if you have an interactive one. So it's more like the art is becoming a video game.
Yeah, but that's actually a revolution, and that's something I want to emphasize on, a very practical aspect, that every artist must make his or her living, and so that's for some kind of a hard fact for me. If we talk about a definition, then the art market, which is the main funding source even today for every artist, is still remaining in these old ages which are object bound.
Luxury goods for rich people.
rich people, or for commissioner, like churches in earlier times, or officials today, which want to use this art for representation, or but it's not paid by the users. So if you pay a ticket in a museum, usually the state puts a lot of money to every ticket, so it's not paid by the user. But if we are considering now art as continuing the idea of video games as something interactive, that means that funding art is shifting from the traditional funders to the consumers. This is revolutionary.
And we're seeing that in crowdfunding, right? I mean, there are plenty of people on Kickstarter in the United States that very much consider themselves professional artists, not necessarily makers of pop culture and media, that are getting crowdsourced funding.
Yeah, and so that's a question. Maybe I ask Sebastian or others or you that what do you think? How will you be able, or how are you able to make your living as an artist doing a kind of art which is depending on interaction with consumers, with the people? So what do you think about that perspective? Is it big enough, the base where for you as an artist doing that kind of art?
It's a really, really, really good question. Actually, in Arsgames we start like a small research group to figure out how to make open source video games, a business model for that, if it's possible, and if it's necessary to make a new license, like a Creative Commons for other kind of stuff for video games, because actually you can license as the code in one side or the artwork in another, the GPL is just for programming, the other is, so it's a kind of, and it's a really good question. I think it will take so long to get some few answers that could be some partial right, partial wrong.
I think it's telling that once we start to talk about games as art, we again immediately default to our perception of games as artifacts and systems that some author somewhere creates and then releases to the public or puts into the museum. And at the very same moment, we forget the potential of playing as art. So I'm thinking, when we go into old games, when we think about the best basketball players or chess masters, are their playing of those games, can it be seen as art, or should it be seen as art? Or if we're thinking about EVE Online and the role players and the Excel masters and the people who are pretending to be people in fictional worlds for years straight, can that be construed as art? And somehow this makes me think of how we again think of art as something that we put into museum. And at the same time, I think we should remember the dual nature of games as not only artifacts and systems, but also as practices and processes and activities that people engage in. And I think that is a perspective that we are lacking in this discussion.
Well, I think that's what Andreas brought in through the references he made with Duchamp and Nam June Paik very specifically. I mean, I think it's a great point, but I also to this question, and Eurídice, what you said about the art becoming more like video games, I remember speaking of the New York art world, the relational aesthetics, is that a book which was read in Europe? In New York City, it was huge in the art world in the 1990s, I think, late 90s is when it came out. So it was a whole new approach to thinking about art rather than as beautiful objects. It was more about community involvement. It was about creating experiences for people. And it was about non-commodity, things like setting up storefronts, temporary storefronts, doing community actions, involving community participants as artists. So for me, it was funny at the time because I thought, oh, art world is discovering design. That we also call that design, right? Creating experiences for people, thinking about context, not rather than this idea of putting a beautiful object on a wall. Maybe that's my arrogance as a artist turned designer. But I also think that, in a sense, you know, it's the way that contemporary art has evolved in the last few decades is very much intermingling with the way we think about design. And even in museums, when I think about a lot of the very, very popular New York shows, they're like Karsten Haller, who turned the new museum, made big holes in the floor and put a big spiral slide that people can go down. Those are the shows where there are like lines out the door around the corner of the museum waiting to get in. These sort of very experiential, participatory, spectacular things that I agree are very much game-like. So I think that there's, you know, but I also think that luxury goods for rich people as art also doesn't need to go away, right? I also think that that's an established practice. The art market, people will have homes that they want to decorate with unique, beautiful objects, and so I think it's fine that artists can supply that market, you know, with art too.
But it can't be supplied by the video games artists because there's problem collecting. There's no architect.
There are galleries in New York City that have tried to address this, like Postmaster's Gallery is a gallery for digital art in New York City, and they've worked with artists to create limited edition digital works.
But that's something which is against the digital nature. So right. one of the main things of digital things are that there is no difference between a copy and original. It's the same, and that's the strength of every digital nature. And if you artificially limit this, because to make it compatible to the traditional games market, then, in my opinion, it's sick.
Right, but I mean,
of course, the same problem concerned photography and video art before, so it's probably somehow to be solved in future, but I have no idea how. I mean, the figure of the author standing behind the artwork is an important part of the deal, I would say. His signature, the number of copy, things like that we're used to.
Yeah, I think there is a development of our understanding of art, and it's going from a very object-bound thing to an understanding of a process. That's, but that needs some time, maybe, and maybe even some generations of people growing up.
Especially, you cannot collect processes, and that's the main problem. Or let's say. Impressions.
Right, but I mean, process-based art's been around for half a century. So there's nothing radical or revolutionary in process-based art, and artists working with digital media, and artists, you know, working in mass media. So,
but this is to be found by institutions more than private collectors, from the nature of.
Okay, that doesn't make it art or not art.
Chciałabym tylko obronić przykład tego, że
I would like to defend one of those examples. I don't really think you have to sell an object to document art. Performance, for instance, conceptual art. It's about making money, not documenting, in fact. But recently, two months ago in Venice, a word was sold for a few $1 million. A word, it's contemporary, a few words. But I think devaluation is very fast here. But when we speak about contemporary art, we speak about selling ideas, not selling objects. We don't speak about, I think, about the originality of work of art. We haven't been doing it for a century, but about processing. So if we want to end up in a museum or on a white wall, if we want to perhaps our object to be put somewhere in the living room, it's okay, but we are talking mainly about ideas, about a high concept. We are in the 21st century, not at the turn of the 19th and 20th century.
Sorry, it's just now with all people talking about the money, I'm just remember a sentence, I don't know who said, but it was when the artists get all together, talk about money. When the bank people get all together, talk about art. So a lot of what happened here, talking about money or how to make money, I mean.
But you know, it's a problem, because I think art is mainly defined as something that it's made for ideas, you know, art is an idea. and video games are made for money. Oh yes, yes. maybe majority, yeah. And I think it could be a problem if we connect art to the video games. It's maybe like in cinema decades ago. So money or idea, art or entertainment.
So you have games which are made 100% to earn money, but you also have other games which are made for other reasons, and you have it not only today. You have it since computer games are programmed. You have everything of these reasons, and so it's. I very much like your. Applied art. I think that's really something which is true for the majority of computer games. And applied art is both somehow. It's well crafted. If it's a good gameplay and it's motivating gamers, then it's well crafted. But without some extra special creativity, it's not really good and perfect applied art. And so I'm also very fine with considering the majority of games as applied art, having both aspects. But then you have, of course, pure commercial things which are not, well, games, and you have art games as well.
I really feel that the word game is a very general word that just means so many things. To me, it's the same category as the word image, for example. The game is as general and as various as image. Are some images art? Yes. Are some images advertising? Yes. Are some images scribbles by children? Yes. So games are also all of those things. So the idea that we're trying to figure out what bucket games goes into, it seems like it's you know, there's always going to be exceptions because the notion of game itself is such a broad and general. I mean, again, you could say, for me, the written word, right, can be used to make dialogue in Shakespeare or a play, but it also can be used to, you know, in a commercial on the radio. So it's not, that's why I think this, like, where do we put games? Is it in art or entertainment? Well, obviously, it could be both, I think. And
just
more.
to add to that, and also I want to highlight what Marcus just said, to think about games not as objects only, but to think about the play and performance aspect in them. And when you start thinking about that, you notice all these parallels to the music world, to the performance world, to the theater world. So there's other art forms than object-based art, obviously. And all these different art forms, which are totally established, have funding models and have traditions on how artists figure out how to make a living or not with them, right? And game designers that work with these art forms can hook into these funding models, and that's what's happening a lot. So I think it's just more complex. I mean, if you look at games, they're at this moment where nobody really knows exactly what to do with them, and then there's all these established strategies around them, kind of grabbing at them. And it'll sort itself out, I think. But basically, for me, it's very important that, you know, games are also connected. I think games are as close to music and somebody playing an instrument beautifully as they are to an object. You know, it depends what's interesting to you.
I would also say that the problem with is an image, for example, an art, or is it an entertainment, is to be addressed by, usually by modes of distribution. Yes, you take that picture, you give it in a science magazine, it's truth. Right. It has no true value. If you give it in arts magazine, it's beautiful. Right. And it's, you know, political, good, and it's in a newspaper. And the same happens with games. Like he said, we've got these channels, and if we've got something on Run.me.org or Rhizome, we say, well, it's probably art. This software is art. But we've got the software on Steam, and we say, well, it's an entertainment. But then we've got Jason Rohrer, and he puts it in SourceForge, and we don't know what to do. Yes, it's an art game.
So maybe the answer to the question is, I wasn't sure if games were art, and then I heard that the Goethe-Institut was doing a whole program around them, so of course they must be art. The context makes the meaning.
And concerning this discussion, I'm curious, Minecraft, it's art or entertainment? Sorry.
Is the paint art?
Yeah, that's very much the level I also would see Minecraft on. It's a material, it's a great tool set, and of course you can do art with it. You can, but you can also do a lot of other things with it.
So, one comment. I must say, I was confused for at least 20 to 30 minutes going into the panel what we're actually doing here, and by now I feel I figured it out. And what we're doing is one giant coordination exercise. We're trying to coordinate on what the word game and what the word art actually mean. Because there's no natural definition. You can't point to something and say, oh, look, that mountain there, that is art, or look, it's wet, it's a game. So what people call art is art. And you can think of these examples where artists create something and then the cleanup personnel throws it away. And that clearly fails the definition of art by people not regarding it as art. So what we're doing here is everyone likes art because they're artists or likes games because they're gamers. And we're talking about finding some common ground. It's not easy to find a definition. Why are we talking about it so much when it seems pointless? But it's not pointless. We're talking about language here. The whole exercise here is about finding common ground of what the sound art, when you say art, what do you mean? And we're talking about it to make that clearer, to make further discussion more easy. And, well, not only we are doing it, but other people are doing it in the end. And that's why it's evolving. And maybe in 50 years, art will have some completely different meaning from now.
Maybe we should be trying to make the discussion less clear, more confusing, messier, and interesting.
I think now it's clear for me what art is. After all the discussion about money, I think art is getting public subventions. So video games is art, make government give money to make games.
So actually, that's what's happening. I just came from the German Computer Game Award yesterday, which was awarded in Munich. It's funded with 300,000 euros tax money. It's an annual award. Based on a decision of the Parliament, of the German Parliament, 2007, and within the jury and the responsible people, they also have the same discussion. So the justification for spending that money was that they wanted to help cultural valuable games came to life and support people who create that kind of games. But of course, other games were also nominated, like Crisis, for example, which is one of the most important German game franchises. And so it's happening, but it's not working well, honestly. But on the other hand, the winner of the category Best International Computer Game became Papers, Please. And Papers, Please, everybody who has played that game, that's very close to what we understand as art, in my opinion. And so this became the winner of that category.
By the way, that game's doing very well commercially.
Yeah.
As an indie game.
Yeah, and that's a good example that it must not be a contradiction to produce a game which is quite interesting because it's irritating, right. And even commercially successful. So
while I think that games can be many things, it also strikes me that part of the juice of games, by that I mean part of the sort of cultural impact of games is their connection to popular culture, and also their connection to the kind of the perversity of play, right? That play is for children, that it's useless, that it's inappropriate, that it somehow is subversive. Play is intrinsically subversive. So there's a sense in which becoming part of the art establishment is a little bit different than that, you know. It kind of rubs up against that in an uncomfortable way.
But I think there's also one reason why we have problems to understand games as art or play as art. of course, you are completely right. It's really not defined perfectly, and we have even a difference between English and German language. If you are talking about an artist, you mean not the same thing. Like when we say Künstler, there's much more a craftsman in what you mean with an artist when we say in German Künstler, and so that's really, of course, we cannot manage to build the ground in 1.5 hour. It's not possible. But there is one thought maybe I also want to tell is that at least the simple kind of games, not theater, like chess or other games, usually they have not an ethic within it. So there's, of course, you are not allowed to break the rules of the game. But within the rules, there is no ethic. There's no moral, like you have in every story, or which is totally linear. And I think that's maybe also a problem we have, that we somehow expect that art is somehow dealing with moral, ethic questions, and playing something is at least traditionally not connected in our understanding with ethics.
But there are values embedded in chess, right? That the foot soldiers are sacrificed for the more important pieces, that the king is...
But
the king is the
is it
ruler.
important for the player?
The feminist interpretation of the queen.
Yeah, but for the player, please, is it important? No, it's just an abstract rule, and there are two rules which are not allowed to break, the rules of the game, and of course I must want to win. If I accept the rules of the game but don't want to win, then I'm also a destroyer of the game. But if I'm accepting these two rules, then somehow it's working well, without any moral, without any ethic.
Ja bym chciał, jeśli można, po polsku, Polish.
Now a question in Polish. Two short comments. When we try to define what is art and what is not, when we think about video games in this context, we start to get mixed up. Films, moving pictures, video games, different forms of art are being mixed up. The cinema, for instance, becomes interactive. I am involved in making interactive films at the moment. An interactive film. What does this mean? This is like bringing together film and computer games. Is it art? But if I employ artists, actors, directors, if I take them from the world of cinema, I choose what is best in cinema, and I also choose what is best in computer games, what attracts people the most. So I think for me it's art, it's clearly art. Of course, much depends here on the way we put it all together, and also much depends, I think, on the distribution, as it has been said, whether we will advertise ourselves as the first interactive film ever and make tickets extremely expensive. But this is not the right way, I think, forward. Economic issues aside, let me say that we are now, in my view, facing a big change. It's not, in my view, very important to define whether a computer game is art or not. Well, for me, anyway, it is art, but it is not extremely important, I think, because once we define it, things will change and there will be new artists adding things again, and whatever we have been able to define will have to be redefined again. So I'm not sure whether it's so important to define things. Thank you.
A ja się zastanawiam nad taką sytuacją.
I'm just wondering, why do we introduce ethical issues and moral issues? Why do we speak about it in the context of chess? Many pictures, well-known pictures of Hopper, for instance, or sculpture. Do we also look for what is ethical or moral there?
Idź przeczytać trochę książek.
I don't agree. Go and read some books, please.
Nie, no, spokojnie, spokojnie.
Okay, let us calm down. Let's calm down a bit. In my view, talking about the contemporary art, if the contemporary art, well, certainly it's based on certain principles. It is a certain dialogue of the artist with the audience. If you don't understand your ABC, the alphabet, then it doesn't make sense that you try to do some interpretation. You need to know the basics. You need to know the alphabet to understand art. So let us move on, I think, forward in this discussion. We speak about different tools we have, and with those tools, we should be able to create something either hopeless or something very useful, or art. We all know that this is what happens. If you have a hammer, you can break a glass, you can build a house, or you can perhaps hang it on the wall, and we will have ready-made art. But now let us move on to another thing, the way in which people experience games in the contemporary world, how they interpret games around. What kind of objectives do we have when creating the game, and whether the audience understand what the authors of the game want to show us. Let me say that if once we know the alphabet, perhaps we should know it, we should understand it.
Well, let me respond to that, though. Hopper was a very good example. Why? There are many interpretations of his paintings, so there are many different ABCs, there are many different languages that he may use. And the discussion is pointless, because we have been talking about it for the last 30 minutes, and I've got an important issue. There are 3 segments to the question that was posed. And for political reasons, I guess, one was completely skipped. What is entertainment, and why is it opposed to art? That's the question I want to put to you.
So, but that's what somehow Eric told us, that there is no contradiction between art and entertainment.
But Tomasz, you said, why is entertainment opposed to art? I'm not an art historian, but my understanding is that the contemporary idea of art as being separated from folk culture, popular culture, emerged in sort of the Renaissance, I guess, or post-Renaissance era, right? Because before that, church frescoes and paintings and what we study as a history of Western art was also popular art. It also was educational, and so those categories were mixed together. But the separation from sort of high art from craft or popular culture, of high music from folk music, for example, it's not new. I mean, it's a few hundred years old, but it's not intrinsic to human culture. It's kind of an artifact. So my understanding is that that's where the separation started to occur in the contemporary sense that we have it now. But of course, the notion of high art versus low art is something that's been questioned both by practitioners of popular applied arts like comic books, and also by institutions like the Museum of Modern Art, which has, every year or so has different shows that explore the relationship of popular culture to high art, etc. Plus artists that are blurring the boundaries and game makers that are blurring the boundaries. So it's that maybe that answers the unanswered question a little bit.
I think what Tomasz was asking was more about that art has some revolutionary layer inside, and entertainment is more for keeping people calm and drain them out of money.
Right. Well, that's what
basically. So that was this political aspect, I believe, you were asking about.
Well, Eurídice mentioned that a little bit too. The idea that one understanding of art is to break conventions, and whether those conventions are the way one uses a cultural form properly, or whether they're representational or political or what have you.
Okej, no niestety ja wiem.
Yes, I do know that we would all love to go on. I know that we would all love to continue, but life is a game and our time is up. To put it shortly, thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to thank the panelists here. I think that it's good that we had a bit of a discussion, that there was some tension, because things are born out of tension, aren't there? And Artur Wabik will moderate the next panel, and I will just add things from time to time.